Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming out. We love the book club. I'm Susan Malmstrom. I'm the director and archivist for the Hoffmans-Milken Center for Typography. Our real estate is downstairs. We have a gallery, instructional space, an archive, and a beautiful letterpress studio. But this is the second event we've done this year with the book club, so we love having you back. And I am just here for a second to bring on Greg, who's the moderator for your program.
Thank you. So thanks to the Art Center for having us here. And my name is Greg Chrysalis. I'm a former board member of the Book Club of California, and I have taken some of Kevin's responsibility. So again, thank you to Archetype Press. For those of you who are new to the Book Club of California, I think there are many of you here. The Book Club of California is a nonprofit, member and donor-supported organization dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts, oftentimes with a focus on the literature and history of California and the West. The Book Club of California publishes limited edition books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. It hosts a year-round series of exhibition and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, and more. If you are not a member, or if your membership has lapsed and you are interested in what we do, which you should be, well, clearly you are because you're here, please join our century-long tradition. Membership dues are modest and the benefits are many. You simply can't do the work we do without the support of you and our members. Please check out our website at bccbooks.org. That's BCC Book Club of California books.org, and join or donate. Tonight's event is a little different than we usually do. We're going to have a conversational type of evening, and there will be a question and answer opportunity at the end, and I'm supposed to do the commercial pitch that books are available. They are running out. See Kevin in the back of the room, and he'll take credit cards and IOUs, I think. A Bitcoin and stock.
Drugs.
Stock transfer. Drugs too?
Yeah, drugs.
Okay, we're back. He'll now take drugs too. Since we're from San Francisco, I think that's easily transferable. Okay. Also, there is a keepsake tonight that Richard, on his own, has printed. This is special for tonight's attendees. It's a woodcut from the book too, right?
Yes.
Yes, it is woodcut from the book, and it's all been letterpressed and signed by Richard. So, the Book Club of California is proud to present its 243rd publication. From California, Poems by Dana Gioia and Engravings by Richard Wagener. It's an elegant work from two very accomplished California artists. These artists are working in vastly different mediums of expression. They offer a convergence of cultural reflection and creative vision, illuminating the essence of California. Each poem and image stands on its own, but together they coalesce to form a rich mosaic of the spirit that is California. I covered that. Oh, and before I introduce Richard and Dana, I would like to thank Norman Clayton of Classic Letterpress in Ojai for printing the book, Rebecca Chomley of Pie in the Sky Press, who we'll be talking about, I'm sure. She did the papers, fantastic papers for the covers. And Nina Schneider of the William Andrews Clark Library. Where are you, Nina? There she is. She did the wonderful essay on Richard's printing and artwork at the end of the book. And I also need to thank Kevin for all of his heavy lifting during this project. And we still have a good rapport after it. So this publication is a marriage of two strong lineages of the Book Club of California. There are long tradition of publishing. The tradition of the works by the tradition of the works by notable California poets, which has included George Sterling, Ina Coolbrith, Robinson Jeffers, and William Everson. And the other tradition of wood engraving, which includes books about Eric Gill, Paul Landacre, John DePaul, the two wonderful notable books by Richard Wagener, and the recently published important and beautiful books on Joe Mora and Mallet Dean. There has been a plethora of the other books that are illustrated with these with engravings by many other artists. However, this is the first book that both traditions share equally in one book. So, introducing first Dana Gioia. He's a poet and a critic. He is author of 6 collections of poetry, including Interrogations at Noon, which received the American Book Award, 99 Poems New and Selected, which won the Poets Prize. His critical collections include Can Poetry Matter, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Award. He has written 5 opera libretti and edited 20 literary anthologies. Dana was born in Los Angeles, the son of a Sicilian father and Mexican mother, and he was the first person in his family to attend college. He attended Stanford as an undergraduate and Harvard as a doctoral student in comparative literature, before leaving to go back to Stanford to get an MBA. For 15 years, he worked in business in New York before quitting in 1992 to become a full-time writer. Dana is the former Poet Laureate of California. He became the first and only laureate to visit all 58 counties of the state. Dana also served as the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts from 2003 to 2009. Business Week magazine called Dana the man who saved the NEA. For 9 years, Dana was Judge Whitney Professor of Poetry and Public Culture at USC, and he divides his time both between Los Angeles and Sonoma County. Richard Wagener also grew up in Southern California, spending much of his time in remote areas of the desert and in the Sierra. Early classes introduced him to Maynard Dixon and Edgar Payne. He received a bachelor's degree in natural science from the University of San Diego and a graduate degree in painting from the Art Center College of Design. He has been engraving wood for 40 years, and his work has been in numerous fine press editions. Most notably, he's worked with Peter Koch in Berkeley, David Pascoe of the Wacom Press, and the Book Club of California, of course. In 2006, Richard established his own imprint, Mixolydian Press, and a book called Loom was a collaboration with the Wacom Press, received the 2016 Carl Hertzberg Award for Excellence in Book Design. Richard has also received the Oscar Lewis Award from the Book Club of California for contributions of the book arts. In 1999, Richard was elected as a member of the Society of Wood Engravers in England. This organization was started in 1920 by a group of artists, including Lucien Pizarro and Eric Gill. He currently lives and works in Northern California. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good to be here.
Dana, what is the origin story of this publication?
Well, a guy named Greg Chrysalis got the idea, I think, of putting Richard and me together to do a book. There's traditions in the book arts which tend to be driven by the artist or be driven by the writer. Where the illustrations, the artwork becomes an illustration for the writing, or the writing becomes a kind of caption, for the image. And Greg had the idea of bringing us together to do a book in which my writing and Richard's image coexisted. And it was a very ambitious project. I mean, this book, I've been involved with many fine press projects across my career, and this book, I think, in some ways, is the most carefully crafted and perfected volume I've ever been involved with. There isn't one element of it, that isn't considered. And the beautiful thing, and I don't know if I'm stealing any of your thunder, Richard, but from the typography to the color palette, everything is I think harmonized and counterpointed in a way which is beautiful. And it even has something which I've loved since my teenage years, fold-outs. You know, but it's a remarkable book. And, it was a pleasure to work with Richard, whose work I've admired for many years, and he and I have been involved in the same project, but never in a way that we were, in a sense, collaborating, as equals. And it's a wonderful project. And Greg deserves the credit because it's also an expensive and complicated project that took some time to make happen.
Well, and it was complicated, started during COVID, and we ran out of the world supply of this special paper. Richard can
give a long catalog of the things we had to do. So, Richard, how accurate is my origin story?
Well, I take it back farther than that. It was probably 2017, something like that. David Pascal and I were working on an idea of doing a book of jazz portraits. I had this friend up in Missoula, Montana, who did these wonderful wood engravings of Duke Ellington, Chet Baker, all these greats. And I thought, what a wonderful thing to put these in books. No one else was doing it, so I contacted him. He was game for it. And we thought about who would write a text for us to go with the book. And I remember that Dana had told me that his brother was a jazz critic. So I contacted his brother, and his brother agreed to write an essay for us. And then David had this idea, wouldn't it be great if we had both brothers in the same book? So I called up Dana and went up there, we had lunch, and we were showing him these portraits and told him what our ideas were. He said he'd think about it. But I also took up some engravings that I'd done of trees that were, I had seen up in the Sierras, in the Donner Pass area. And I, on a separate note, said, might there be something that we could do with these at some point? And I left, there's no resolution at that point, but I left the proofs of those engravings with Dana. When Greg called up and proposed this project, and I kind of hemmed and hawed about it, didn't want to commit right away. But at one point we said, let's go up and talk to Dana and have this discussion of what this might be. And the nice thing was we went out to Dana's library. It's got a wonderful library on his property. And I walked in and I was kind of looking around, and here's one of the proofs up on the shelf in his library. And I went, okay, this kind of sets the tone for what this could be. And the discussion went from there.
And for the record, I did write the poem for the jazz thing, but when people ask me to write a poem, I can write a poem, but I can't write a good poem, unless it comes on its own. But eventually the poem came on its own, and it actually became the title poem of my last collection. It's called Meet Me at the Lighthouse. The lighthouse, I hope you all know, is in Hermosa Beach, the jazz club. So, it was so Richard's request provoked, a poem.
It was nice because I hadn't heard from Dana for a long time, and one time it was about 10, 11 o'clock at night, and I checked my email, and there's one from Dana. He says, I'm in Chicago, it's some hotel, he had done some event there, and I thought of an idea, I'll do something. And wow, now we have it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so it was a wonderful, this book is a tremendous book. Perfect in every respect, except it had no images by Richard. Richard was the producer of it, to make a beautiful book for a friend of his who had created these really large, oversized, jazz portraits. And so, it was finally we were able to work together. I'd seen these spectacular natural images of, of the Sierras, of the California coast by Richard. But I said, I've got a lot of urban poems, that are about LA. And he looks at me like I'm an idiot, which is an expression he gives me frequently. And says, I grew up in LA. And then he showed me these, these wonderful images he'd done, basically of LA urban scenes, including a 1950 Packard, which was perfect for one of the poems that I had written. Not as an illustration, but an accompaniment.
Yeah, I didn't read the poems. Oh, I've read the poems. I have all the books and everything. But aside from that, putting that aside, it's trying to get the tenor of the poems, the feelings and everything else, and then kind of work with those ideas. So I didn't want to have, well, I never do something as a one-to-one relationship. And even the number of engravings in the books, it would be difficult for me to do a one-to-one thing, because then you have those comparisons that would be silly. And so spreading them out and having different things. But there are a couple of things. The poem that Dana was referring to is called Film Noir. And what it just jogged in my mind is Jimmy Cagney, and I was trying to think, what kind of a car would Jimmy Cagney have driven in the late 40s, early 50s? And back then, a real classy car was the Packard. Unfortunately, it went out of business in 1953. But, so the classic Packard super extra deluxe touring sedan or something like that fit in with the idea of film noir as opposed to trying to write to his words.
Greg, did you have other questions?
Yeah, so I was just engulfed in the conversation. So what about working with the Book Club of California, Dana? What?
Well, I was honored because I'm a Californian. I mean, I've lived all over this country, but I'm a Californian, and I have this primordial belief that where you live matters. I have this belief that, we don't exist in a kind of a spaceless, bodiless internet. We have physical bodies, and where we are gives us a unique perspective on the world. And so as a poet, it was an important moment for me, in my development, when I understood where I saw the world from. And I've always valued the California literary tradition, which is just unlike New York or Boston or the South. We have this strange mix of the populist, the visionary, and the serious. And one of my favorite books, period, unfortunately, one copy I had, I gave to a dear friend of mine as a thank you gift, is the Book Club of California edition of Robinson Jeffers' poems. I think it's 1928, 1926. I get the year mixed up, with an Ansel Adams portrait at the front. To me, it was one of the most beautiful books of poetry of the greatest poet of California. But this whole, Steinbeck, Jack London, we have the biographer of John Fonte in the audience. This is a kind of, Charles Bukowski. These are people that speak from my experience. As much as I love Balzac, Flaubert, and Stendhal, you hear the voices of your own time and place differently. So I was greatly honored, in a sense, to have a book in this century-plus-old institution that was dedicated both to the literature and the history of the West, and also bookmaking at its finest.
And poetry. Yeah, part of literature. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's. I think we began literature.
Okay. So getting on the more practical side for a lot of the book people here, Richard, you took on the responsibility for designing the book. What were your objectives? How were these met? And what were some of the problems we ran into.
I think the overriding thing has to be what is California, what it means to me, what it feels like. And I wanted something bright, sunny. So I didn't want a lot of grays in there, which led me to, a certain color palette. One of the things is this cloth that I found, which is iridescent, and depending upon how you look at it, it's either green or it's brown. And isn't that California, especially up north? We have 6 months of green hills and everything else, and 6 months of brown hills. So that really spoke to me a whole lot. One of the problems is I had 2 different binders. One did this edition, and then the deluxe edition was done by J. Scrap in Austin. And I had spec'd out what I wanted for both of them. But the binder who did the standard edition called up the supplier, bought up all the cloth for this. So when J. Scrap called up to get his amount for the clamshell box for the deluxe, not available, no one knows when they might see it again, if they will. So that presented a problem. What are you gonna do? We selected something else. Also, one of the nicest papers that has been used for years and years to print wood engravings, whether here in the United States or the UK, is from the Zircon mill in Germany. And a few years back when they had those horrendous floods in Germany, the mill was flooded to the point where they had to stop operation. And even though the German government came in and said, we'll give you some loans or anything to resurrect the mill, the owner said no. So right away, word got out, all the Zircon papers available from all the suppliers immediately were grabbed up. And we're very fortunate that Peter Koch in Berkeley had a stash of this paper that we were able to acquire from him to print the book. Which, one of the problems, it's nice when you're printing and you have paper that you can always get more of and stuff. If you make a bunch of mistakes, just get some more paper. We weren't given that luxury in doing this, so we were quite limited. In
Dana?
terms of the cover of the book, I had this vision in my mind of what I thought it should be, and I thought, maybe I could do something like that. But very quickly, I realized what I was thinking about wasn't what I could do, but what this person here could do, Rebecca Shanley, who, I just so admire her work, and over the years we see each other at book fairs and stuff. And I thought that's what it should be. So I called Rebecca and said, "What do you think?" And she came through. What a beautiful paper she created for the book, which I think speaks to California. You wouldn't think of any other place, seeing something like this.
And talk a little bit more about the fold-out drawings. Why fold out?
Back in around 2011, Peter Koch and I were talking, and I said, I have a bunch of engravings that I've done since our first book, which was what was the first one? California in Relief. But I have a whole bunch of other things. I think it would be nice to have a companion book. And the book club gave us the green light. And one of the ideas that Peter talked about, I was just the idea of panoramas. He mentioned it and kind of left it there. So I started thinking about it and thought, well, I could do some panoramas, but it might pose a problem for the designer of the book. How are we going to do that? And I called up Peter and expressed my concerns, and Peter said, do whatever you want to do, I'll design around it. So, since I was doing long panorama-like things, I did two of them. I used 2 blocks, so a diptych to create the image. And they were so wide that the engraving couldn't breathe on the page alone. And so the idea that we came up with was to do this fold. So number one, it's, there's the mystery to it. You have something there and you have to open it up. But it also gives the image some area to breathe. So, when this project came up, part of it was, I get all my blocks from England. The only person I know in the world who is making boxwood blocks for engraving is outside of Newcastle, England. The problem that I run into is that the climate in Newcastle very much different to California. And so getting into this drier climate, the blocks can crack and check and cut, do all kinds of nefarious things. The larger the block, my fear is that it's more susceptible to these things happening. So I've kind of limited myself to certain sizes. The other thing is, it takes a long time. I've ordered blocks from him, and 6 months later, and I still don't have them. For one of the projects I did, I got half the blocks, and then I had to wait another 6 months or whatever. So I was working with the blocks I had, and just size-wise, the only way to do a block like this and have it really work is to have the gatefold.
Dana, your poems, what period of time were they written? When was the first one?
Well, this book basically goes across my whole career, and it begins with one of the signature poems of my first book. It ends with the last poem in my current book. So it really goes from start to finish. But poems that are either about the California of the physical universe or the California of the mind.
Well,
2 different things.
So here, California Hill?
Yeah, but this is the first poem of the book. This is a poem that was the first poem I did that had a real impact. I wrote it, I didn't think anybody would like it, and it ended up in the New Yorker, reprinted everywhere, and it was translated into pretty much the language of every dry country. It was, I was living in New York then, and I had to come out to California because my father nearly died. He had a medical emergency, and it was all resolved favorably. And I hadn't slept for about 48 hours, and I left the Stanford Hospital. I started walking through the hills behind Stanford, with the beautiful hills of the old Santa Clara Valley, it looked like. And the poem came to me, and I realized I've been writing it in my unconscious the whole time. And it really originates back east. I heard this blowhard that I worked with, who had just come back from a trip to California. He says, "Oh God, California's so ugly in the summer. It's all brown, it's dry. It isn't pretty like Vermont." And this irked me. And so I was walking through these beautiful summer hills. It was August, tremendous heat. And I thought about how an Easterner would see the landscape and how a Westerner would see the landscape. The poem is in one endless sentence, but the editors of the New Yorker judiciously put a period at the end of each stanza. To give it an elegance the original did not fully possess. California, hills in August. I can imagine someone who found these fields unbearable, who climbed the hillside in the heat, cursing the dust, cracking the brittle weeds underfoot, wishing a few more trees for shade. An Easterner especially, who would scorn the meagerness of summer, the dry, twisted shapes of black elm, scrub oak, and chaparral, a landscape August had already drained of green. One who would hurry over the clinging thistle, foxtail, golden poppy, knowing everything was just a weed, unable to conceive that these trees and sparse brown bushes were alive, and hate the bright stillness of the noon, without wind, without motion, the only other living thing, a hawk, hungry for prey, suspended in the blinding sunlit blue. And yet, how gentle it seems to someone raised in a landscape short of rain. The skyline of a hill broken by no more trees than one can count. The grass, the empty sky, the wish for water.
It just hit me after I've read that a couple times and hearing you read it a couple times. There's a hawk in there, and immediately all of a sudden think of Robert
Yeah, it's very
Jeffers.
yeah.
Well, his fascination with the hawk.
Well, I think both of us are responding to the fact that there's hawks around here. In fact, when I taught at USC, there was a huge red-shouldered hawk that sat on the edge of the building in which I taught. And I would see him every morning, and I think it was after mice in the evening, and God knows what, sparrows and pigeons right there, but he was this thing of beauty, is, except for the bald eagle, he's the apex bird predator of California. Not one of my students ever noticed him. And I would point him out, because I was actually reading Jeffers. I said, you can see this bird, and the next day I said, who did? Well, they, because what happens when they leave class? They go like this and they go, they never look up. So I'm glad to put a hawk in the poem, because nobody else pays any attention.
Thanks.
I think it's what one does. I'm sorry to interrupt you, too. Is as a poet here, you try to let people see where they live. Whether it's an urban landscape or a natural one, just try to make yourself more present in the world that you actually exist.
You said some very profound things last week about California, the solitude, the progressiveness, the forward, and
Well, I mean, I'm chauvinistic in the original sense of that word about California. I'm proud of this place. I love this place, and I think we're caricatured and misunderstood, in New York and the Northeast. I mean, California, I think, is not simply the West Coast, the left coast of the United States. We're the vanguard by which the United States is moving into the future. We have a combination of people, of races, of creeds, of opinions that are here that live together that have never been mixed before in all of human history. We're populist, we're progressive, we're visionary, we're clever. I mean, we make movies, rockets, and beautiful books. And there's a kind of creativity and risk-taking that's inherent in California, which was founded by people prospecting for gold or creating new industries. And we face not the beautiful Europe of the past, but we face Asia, we face Latin America, and this, I think, is the future of North America. Here, and it's crazy, but is my kind of craziness. And, you know, and I've lived in Washington, New York, Boston, and I, you know, don't find any place as interesting, you know, as California, especially Los Angeles, the craziest town in the whole state. But it's, you know, it's just full of a kind of imaginative energy that you just don't see anywhere else. And as a writer, it's a gift to be in California. Where else can a poet be in an important place, most of which has never appeared in a poem before? I mean, you know, you're putting these things into, if you get it just right, you're putting it into a good poem for the first time in its history, or early in its history. So, you know, the kind of luxury that Chaucer or Shakespeare enjoyed about just having a new world to write about, I think in California, poets have as a gift. Novelists not so much, because they've got about 100 years of pretty damn good California novels. But, you know, California poetry is still a very much evolving thing, and nowhere more so than Los Angeles, which, you know, is a great city that doesn't really yet have a great poetic tradition.
So then how do you see Richard's work, the soul of it, how it fits into all that?
The thing, this is what I said last week, and it hadn't really occurred to me until you asked me a question last week. I love Richard's work because it's beautiful, it's intricate in its imagination and its realization, but what makes it so wonderful for my work is that there's a kind of solitude, a kind of stillness and meditative quality in Richard's work. It's, you know, these are images almost entirely without people, and you know, and it gives you a vision of an urban or a natural world in which your imagination can populate, and and that makes it such a good match for my poetry, which is also as an element of the solitary and meditative.
Thank you. Did anything want to add, Richard?
I like the solitude part. One of the most wonderful experiences that I've had multiple times, gone up to the Bristlecone National Forest, and when I've gone up there, there's maybe one car or two cars, and that's it. And after 10 or 15 minutes, they leave, and you're all alone up there with trees that are 5,000 years old. And it's a feeling you just can't get anywhere else. It's just amazing. And hiking up in the Sierras where no one is there, it's just a wonderful feeling. I've been going up there since I was that high, and it's always stayed with me.
Do we have time for one more poem? Does everybody want to hear another poem? I hear some big grins.
I read the first poem in the book, so I want to read the last poem in the book, which is, I think I brought a copy so I can see it. Maybe not. From here. I thought I brought a copy my aged eyes could read, but I'll read it from this beautiful text. I ended my most recent book with 3 poems in the form of psalms. You know, I borrowed a great opening line from God, and then I wrote about Hawthorne or about the freeways. Actually, I'll read the penultimate poem because I wanted to write a poem about why I loved Los Angeles for years, and I just couldn't find the right entree. And then I ended up, when I first came to USC, I lived with the composer Morton Lawrenson up right below the Hollywood hillside. He lived in one of those storybook. It looked like Bilbo Baggins, should be living there. And I would, every day I would walk into Hollywood Hills, and I realized that I had the vantage point because I'm from the other side of town, from Hawthorne. So for this poem, just imagine you are standing in the Hollywood Hills at night in Los Angeles. All I ask you to do is see, and at the very end of the poem, I ask you to smell. Psalm of the Heights. You don't fall in love with Los Angeles until you've seen it from a distance after dark. Up in the heights of the Hollywood Hills, you could mute the sounds and find perspective. The pulsing anger of the traffic dissipates, and our swank, unmanageable metropolis dissolves with all its signage and its sewage until only the radiance remains. That's when the city of angels appears, silent and weightless as a dancer's dream. The boulevards unfold in brilliant lines. The freeways flow like shining rivers. The moving lights stretch into vast and secret shapes, invisible at street level. At the horizon, the city rises into sky, our demi-galaxy, brighter than the zodiac. Surely our destinies are written in this zodiac, whose courses and conjunctions govern us. Look down and count our starry constellations: Wilshire, Olympic, Santa Monica. In speeding comets or sleek thunderbirds, we traveled the 12 houses of the heavens, ascending Crenshaw, Sunset, or Imperial, locked in our private worlds of lust or laughter. Who can cast the charts of our radiant sorrow, or trace the secret transits of our joy? The traffic shimmers from its fixed trajectories, dense and indifferent as nebulae. Though you resist its gaudy spectacle, you can't escape the city's sortilege. Move away, if you wish, to the White Sierras, or huddle in the smoky canyons of Manhattan. You'll miss the juvenescent rapture of LA, where ecstasy cohabits with despair, lascivious and fitful as a pair of lovers. Let someone else play grown-up. Here, the soul sings like a car radio, and no one asks your age, because we're all immortal. Inhale the spices of the midnight air, drifting from Thai Town and Little Armenia. Here, on the hilltop, the city whispers to you, come down and play in the traffic. Merge into the moving lights, our myriad, the luminous multitudes that surround you. Join their fiery orbit. Shine with us tonight. Where else can you become a star?
We'll open up for questions. Any questions? Want to know what the price of the book is? All right, well, I guess.
Let's take a question here, and then I'll tell you about the book and the keepsake. How's that?
So I'm really interested, once you have seen the book published and you've seen each other's work placed in relationship to one of each other's pieces, how did that reverberate or illuminate some aspect of your work that maybe you had seen before, or maybe you were seeing differently now, whether it was a poem or an image? Was there a moment where it spotlighted something for either of you?
Let me give you just a general observation and then go into particular. If you're a poet, you write in a non-commercial format. I mean, it's not a matter of, even if your poems are bestsellers, and I guess there's a few people who are still like that, but you don't write in 72-page or 1 or 40, you don't write in volumes. You do a poem, and the question is, how can you have that poem exist on a page in its perfect environment? You know, and the nice thing about Fine Press books is they create an environment for the poem. And so ideally, your poem, you know, is given room to breathe, the same way that Richard talked about giving, you know, his prints room to breathe. And as this book developed, I absolutely loved, Norman's typography. It was absolutely the right typography. It was sitting on the page as if that poem and typeface had been born for each other. The format is lovely, and then have the book punctuated. Maybe it's the irreverent word, but suddenly punctuated by these images that literally unfold of the state, which are not illustrating the poem, but sort of accompanying your experience. I felt it was about as ideal an environment, you know, for my poems as I've ever experienced. I mean, and so it's just so what I liked is it created, I think, a situation for a reader to be able to sort of inhale not just the spices from Thai town and Armenia, but the fragrance of the poem, the ambiance of the poem, versus being put into, my publisher sort of said, let me know you have 72 pages of poems. You know, that's what constitutes a book. It's a pre-existing commercial format. And so this gives great freedom, I think, to the writer, and I think to the artist, does it not?
I felt tremendous amount of freedom to do things that I wanted to do that would kind of fit in. And when you mentioned punctuation, made me think back in the 70s when I was downtown Los Angeles a lot, at 5th and Broadway, in front of the Thrifty drugstore, there was a fella, I think they called him the Screamer. But he had his Bible and he would scream out these biblical texts, but you couldn't fully understand it because he would scream, blare it out, and then he would come down to a whisper. But there's always this fella sitting on the curb there with a saxophone. And after he would do that, this guy but it really fit. He would do his riffs, and then the guy would come up with another passage, and he would do his riff and stuff like that. That's the way they should all kind of work together.
Well, it's a good metaphor for us. Two happy madmen. But every copy of this book sells at full price, the book club's still going to lose money. And I think that's why it exists, why all these things exist, to provide something that is outside the marketplace. Even if you buy an expensive ticket to the opera, you can be guaranteed that they're losing money. Ben Donenberg, who's back there, who runs the Shakespeare Festival in LA, Ben, have you ever turned a profit?
All we do is lose money.
Yeah, and there's something glorious about that, and so, to give the artists an indulgence to realize their fantasies. That's what a great culture does. So thank God for organized follies like the Book Club of California, Shakespeare Festival, LA. They enrich our lives.
So here's your chance to help us lose money. Right? Now we'll talk about. So we do have copies of the book here. I didn't bring enough for everyone in the room. I don't think everyone in the room is going to buy one. Some of you already have one. We do have forms in the back that you can fill out, and you can take your book home tonight. The retail price of the book is $450, but for everyone who's here tonight, we're extending the book club member price, which is 10% off, which is $405 plus tax. So there's forms in the back. If you've already filled one out, know that you're only going to be charged the $405, not the $450 retail price that's on the form. So you can check out the book on the table over there, you can fill out a form, and I can give you a copy that you can take home with you tonight. If you're not ready to pull the trigger and buy a book, you can take a form. It's also on the book club's website, eccbooks.org. Or you can ask me any questions that you might have. And now I'm going to tell you about the keepsake, because I think we're wrapping up. Is that right?
Yeah.
Great. So we do have a keepsake that Greg mentioned earlier for folks attending tonight. I honestly don't think there's enough for everyone in the room. So if you're a family, we ask that you just take one for the family. If you don't want one, then don't take one, right? Leave it for somebody who does actually want one, and you can come up here and I'll be happy to give you a keepsake. Greg,
You want to?
throw us out. What's the last thing you
Thank
want
you
to
all.
say?
Yeah, thank you very much for coming.